Welcome to The Authority File, the academic library podcast from Choice. Choice is a publishing division of the ACRL and the publisher of Choice Reviews and CC Advisor. This episode is brought to you by Annual Reviews. I'm Bill Mickey, the host of the podcast and the editorial director at Choice, and for this 4-episode series, I'm joined by Richard Gallagher, the president and editor-in-chief of Annual Reviews, a nonprofit science publisher with a unique content model that's about to get a whole lot more interesting. But before we introduce this third episode, I'd like to ask you, our listeners, for a little help. We've created a survey about our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to fill it out. Your answers will help us understand what you like about the Authority File, what you don't like about it, and what you think we can do to improve it. I'll bet it only takes you about 10 minutes to fill out, and if you want, you can enter to win a $25 Amazon gift card. You can access the survey at www.research.net/r/authorityfile. That's www.research.net/r/authorityfile. Okay, on to episode number 3. In 2017, Annual Reviews launched the digital publication Knowable Magazine. Made possible by funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Knowable is written for the general reader interested in science. The magazine is a bridge between scholarly content, which Annual Reviews specializes in, and a science-interested audience. It takes the findings from Annual Reviews articles, adds a journalistic filter, and makes them presentable to a much wider readership. In this episode, Richard and I dig into that strategy a bit more, exploring what it means for Annual Review's mission to expose a larger audience to insights from scientific research and the importance of the public communication of science in a functional democracy. Okay, so you guys basically got into the magazine business at one point with the launch of Knowable Magazine. It's online only, I believe, correct?
Yes.
It's not a print. Yeah, okay.
No, well, we are going to have an occasional print version. We're in the process of putting the first one together, but primarily it's an online magazine.
Okay, excellent. And so talk about that opportunity for launching Knowable, both for Annual Reviews as an organization and the intended audience. Tell us about what Knowable is and why you published it or are publishing it.
Well, the idea was to use high quality science journalism to make scientific research of all kinds accessible and enjoyable. It's a mix of articles, essays, interviews, with infographics, comics, and slideshows on all kinds of things that are, knowable. They make you feel smarter. In fact, you are smarter. And we wanted to reach as wide an audience as possible, so we used CC BY licenses. And so far, 60 of the articles that we've published have been republished by other venues, in addition to appearing on our website, which is knowablemagazine.org.
Is that a practice that you're actively pursuing, the idea of sort of syndicating that content to other outlets, or is it just naturally getting picked up by other places?
No, it's something that you actually have to work quite hard to achieve. Editors are, rightly jealous of their reputations, and they don't want to republish things that are not going to enhance the reputation of their publication. So they look very skeptically on someone approaching them and suggesting that they republish work that they haven't themselves commissioned. So it's incredibly to the credit of our writers and our editors that we've had organizations like the Washington Post regularly republishes content, the Atlantic magazine, BBC Futures, on and on. There's just a great list of mainstream media outlets that are interested in republishing this content because they can see that there's something unique and very solid and very engaging in the content that Knowable's producing.
Okay. So as you mentioned, Knowable intentionally has a different content model than your reviews. is there any relationship or sort of progression from review content to the articles that appear in Noble, or is this sort of a separate editorial operation completely that kind of has its own sort of editorial strategy and editorial calendar development, that kind of thing?
It does have its own separate team. It's
Mm.
editorially independent, but a lot of the ideas that Knowable runs with are taken from suggestions that are made at the editorial committee meetings that we talked about earlier. So they'll put
Right.
forward suggestions on what they think might make an interesting story. And that's really unusual because typically for a magazine outlet, it'll either be the opinions of the editors or the hobby horse of a particular writer or the press releases that they receive from Science and Nature that will define what the content of the publication is. Here you've got this range of practicing scientists contributing to the mix as well. But at that point, it gets handed over to our independent, knowable staff, and the underlying annual reviews articles sort of serve as a framework for the piece, perhaps, but the writers are free to explore the topic in whatever way the article takes them.
Okay. So I imagine, of course, you're excited that sort of these more mainstream media outlets are picking up your content, but I imagine there might be a little of some relief there as well. Mainstream media is often criticized for the way they approach their science content. I'm wondering if there's any sort of perspective you might have on how the bigger media outlets tend to cover science in general.
There's less of it than there used to be. That's one
Mm.
issue. I
Hmm.
think that what they cover in science is often excellent. It does tend to focus on the latest big result. One week a glass of wine is desirable, the next week alcohol is dangerous, or
Right.
else it's an ethical drama like the misuse of CRISPR technology, or there's a political spin such as on climate change, and the actual scientific findings get a bit obscured, and the sort of sense of wonder is lost along the way. What Knowable does is to step back from the daily news cycle and present the broader picture of where science is at the moment. It's
Hmm.
really complementary to the mainstream science coverage, and I think that's why we've had this success with getting these big name outlets to republish the articles. They can see that there's some depth and some interest in what we're doing, and it's complementary to their coverage of science news as they see it.
Hmm. I'm curious to sort of look at the juxtaposition between sort of the more hard science, so to speak, of annual reviews and the knowable content, and how, for example, you've made that leap into using knowable as your sort of bridge to the a more general audience, and um, sort of exploring how you've actually made that. I mean, was it all sort of in who you hired to produce Knowable, or did you have some ideas going into that in terms of the type of depth of the science content that you were presenting to this audience?
My job was to try and get the funding in place that would allow us to hire an expert staff.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to walk the line between showing that we kind of knew what we were doing, but not be so prescriptive that we didn't take the responsibility away from the real experts that we hired, and they've been fantastic. And they've essentially come in and developed the idea for Knowable themselves. One thing that is included and that we'd always plan to include is that every article provides the reader with free access to one or two or three full annual reviews articles. They get the HTML access. So if you're reading something and you want to take a really deep dive into it,
Mm-hmm.
then the annual reviews article is right there to support you. One of the things that we were trying to address with Knowable is to to give annual reviews a bit of a profile. It was described by a prominent science journalist as the best kept secret in science, and that's not really a good thing. So we're trying to stop keeping it a secret, in part by having Knowable. Knowable's independent, but there's certainly collateral benefits for the organization.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to get to that, and talk about whether or not there might have been any intention of using Knowable as sort of a springboard for taking in reviews content to a broader audience, and or perhaps how Knowable is setting the stage or set the stage for your open access related initiatives.
Yeah, without belaboring it, it's clear that there's a link between Knowable and annual reviews, and Knowable provides access to annual reviews. We're also learning what people want to read and how they want to read it, and that in the long term can have an influence on how the full annual reviews articles are written. There's not going to be a revolution, but there's going to be an evolution in the types of approaches that we ask our authors to take. So maybe there's a longer explanatory introduction, not quite at the cocktail party level, but that allows a more general reader to get a sense of what this full annual reviews article is going to be about.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely barriers to be broken down there, and Knowable's helping us to decide how to experiment in achieving that.
Okay. I mean, what are some of the things that the Knowable content is pointing you towards in terms of, um, you know, how users are engaging with Knowable content, and what those metrics might be influencing in the way of content that you're subsequently producing for them? I mean, is there any sort of editorial strategic decisions that are made based on that engagement?
We haven't looked at what articles have been more read and less
Mm.
read, and tried to do more of one thing than the other thing, because then we'd probably end up with just a psychology journal or a mental health journal. Instead, we want to present the whole array of the wonder and value of science. And in fact, one of the articles that's been most successful was simply entitled "What Makes a Tree a Tree?" And it's a very surprisingly complicated and difficult thing to answer. We all know a tree when we see it, but what is treeness? What makes it a tree? And that article was actually republished by The Atlantic, and it got a huge amount of readership there as well. So while I'd always expected that the real value was going to be to expound on the real world significance of science, actually the awe and wonder of thinking about these things is also very powerful. And so we don't want to, at least for now, we're only 18 months into this project, we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to get pushed down one particular avenue or another, so we're trying to keep it fairly broad.
Good. Okay. Excellent. Um, I suppose, if you had to offer any advice to someone at a science society or another journal that was looking to start a more consumer-facing product, what do you think, or that were perhaps the biggest hurdles or the most important differences between the needs of traditional publications and something like what you're doing?
One of our advisors when we were getting started told us that the key was to define what the future looks like with and without your product. And if it makes a real difference, then you have the impetus to get the best people, to get the tools, and to get the funding.
Mm.
Having that valuable mission is really energizing as well.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you have to set out your expectations in detail, but examine everything constantly and adapt accordingly. The other thing is engage everyone in the organization, because good ideas can come from anywhere in your group. So we've deliberately not siloed the Knowable project. It belongs to all of us at annual reviews. And we all like it, if only because we can now share with our family and friends what annual reviews actually does. Funding's always a challenge, as we're finding out as we're moving from a period of strong support from foundations to the second phase of funding for the magazine. And defining and connecting with the audience is something that you have to work very hard on as well. But the shared purpose and the real enjoyment that we're getting from realizing the project is really satisfying for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Are the funders wanting to see hard numbers in terms of that engagement or growth in some way, or how are you sort of, I guess, assessing the success of Knowable to sort of secure longer term funding for it?
Yeah, they do, and they should. There's no
Yeah.
there's no other test than are people reading it and are they coming back to it, and that's definitely the key criteria for us as well as for funders to judge success. The traffic on the Knowable website has grown month by month. We currently stands at about 80,000 users per month. We've had about 1.2 million page views since the site was launched at the end of 2017. As well as that, we've had, hundreds of thousands, maybe even up to 1 million more page views on the republication sites. One article from BBC Futures that was republished on BBC Futures, one alone had 185,000 views, which is extraordinary. So we think that the influence is growing. It's not yet a heavy hitter, but we're beginning to develop this core of regular users, and even if other people that come at the articles through the Atlantic or the BBC only read one article, there's a benefit to that as well.
You just heard from Richard Gallagher, President and Editor-in-Chief of Annual Reviews. This concludes the third of our four-part series on annual reviews and its shift to an open access publishing model. This episode was brought to you by Annual Reviews. Be sure to join us for the next episode, where we'll conclude this series with a discussion of Annual Review's longer-term open access ambitions and what it calls its subscribe to open model. We'll also touch on Plan S and what other publishers, particularly small or society publishers, need to know about navigating a Plan S landscape.
So Subscribe to Open uses the existing library relationships and subscription purchases that we have to convert our gated access journals to open access.
Don't forget to fill out our new listener survey, which will help us understand what you like about the Authority File. Access the survey at www.research.net/r/authorityfile. That's www.research.net/r/authorityfile. You can find all of the episodes of the Authority File on your favorite podcast app or on our website, choice360.org. Just click on the librarianship dropdown. On choice360.org, you'll also find information on Choice's entire product platform, including Choice Reviews, CC Advisor, Choice Webinars, resources for college libraries, our white papers, and a whole lot more. A great way to keep up with the Authority File is to join the Choice Authority File Facebook group, which you can access via the Choice Reviews Facebook page. As a member of the group, you can give us feedback, suggest podcast participants, chat with other listeners, and submit new topic ideas. Sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and the production and editing are done by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.